I saw 3 girls on the street, identical to the woman I pushed out of my life 7 years ago. They had my eyes, and they were selling candy to keep from starving. I returned to my car and followed them to their home. When I arrived, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Alex Thompson was leaving the federal courthouse in Chicago when something suddenly stopped him. In the middle of the busy square, he saw 3 identical girls selling sweets beside a poorly dressed woman. They had the same eye color as Emily Mitchell and his own. He froze. It wasn't just the resemblance. The girls shared his gestures, the way they furrowed their brows, even the exact curve of their chins. A coincidence like that couldn't be possible. His heart began to race. He tried to convince himself he was mistaken, but there was something undeniable. Those girls had something of his, something he couldn't explain, yet it felt as real as the concrete beneath his feet. And then, without thinking, he acted. He crossed the square slowly, trying not to draw attention. He followed the group from a distance, observing their every movement. The woman seemed nervous, almost paranoid, dragging the girls quickly to an old van parked next to a newsstand. Alex climbed into his official car, never taking his eyes off the van, and started to follow them. He drove through streets he wasn't familiar with, leaving the center behind and venturing into humbler areas. No one spoke. No one looked back. After several minutes, the vehicle stopped in front of a worn building on the outskirts of Tacoma. An almost faded sign hung at the entrance. Casa Esperanza, temporary home for minors. From the driver's seat, Alex couldn't stop staring. His hands gripped the wheel tightly. He murmured almost unconsciously, "Who are you and why?" There were no answers, only one certainty. This encounter was not a coincidence, and he wasn't going to let it slip by. Back in his apartment, with a panoramic view of downtown Chicago, Alex Thompson collapsed onto the couch. He switched on the desk lamp and opened an old box of keepsakes he hadn't touched in years. Inside were photos, letters, airplane tickets, napkins with notes, and some printed images of Emily, of when they traveled together to San Diego, Lake Tahoe, Santa Fe. The dim light cast shadows across his face. He was looking for something, a clue. A sign that would explain how it was possible for those girls to look so much like him and her. The girls must have been about 6 years old, maybe a little younger, and it had been 7 years since he and Emily had separated. It wasn't hard to do the math. He didn't need a lawyer or a birth certificate to understand what that might mean. The silence of all these years began to sound louder. What if Emily had tried to find him? What if those girls were his daughters? His stomach twisted. He called his personal driver, David, who had worked with him for over 10 years, and gave him a short but precise order. Investigate Casa Esperanza without drawing attention. He wanted names, dates, records, any document that could explain who those girls were and why they were there. The next day, Alex walked through the hallways of the courthouse, pretending everything was the same. But his mind couldn't leave that square, those green eyes that had looked at him in confusion, that strange woman who seemed to be hiding something more than poverty. Everything inside him screamed that there was a story behind it all, one that no one had ever told him. Then a memory came rushing back, one he thought was buried forever. The last argument with Emily, the shouting, the accusations, the printed messages that Anna, his sister, had handed him with a surgical coldness. Emily denying everything. He had believed Anna, he had always believed her. That certainty began to waver. He opened the box where he kept the divorce papers. He reviewed each page more carefully than ever. The supposed messages of infidelity were there, but only as printed text. No screenshots, no names, no visible dates, just cold documents without context. For the first time in a long time, Alex felt that something didn't add up, and pride gave way to a doubt that pierced him completely. What if I made the worst mistake of my life? If you're watching this, I'm sure you're liking it, so I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. David's report arrived the next day, printed and inside a yellow envelope with no return address. Alex opened it with firm yet sweaty hands. It was only a few sheets, but the impact was immediate. The girls' names were Chloe, Hannah, and Ivy Mitchell. They were 6 years old, all three, born on the same day. He read and reread the information. There was no record of a father in the documents, only a blank space. In the mother section, Emily Mitchell's name appeared with a red note, absent due to abandonment. Custody was with the state, nothing more. No address, no exact admission date, no family references, just an institutional stamp and a brutal statement. They were alone. His heart pounded in his chest. The last name, the age, the identical faces. It wasn't just a suspicion, it was almost a confirmation. But his trained mind, ever skeptical, still demanded proof. He needed to see them again. Hear their voices. Feel if there was something connecting him to them beyond blood. That same afternoon, Alex visited Casa Esperanza under the pretext of being a businessman interested in supporting social causes. He dressed casually, no tie, no expensive watch. He got out of the car without his driver. He knew he couldn't appear as who he really was. The orphanage was more run down than he remembered. Rusted bars, chipped paint, a gate that creaked when opened. In the yard, a few children ran through cracks in the cement, dodging a deflated ball. On the side, under a dry tree, sat the three girls, alone, silent, as if they knew they didn't belong with the others. A thin woman with white hair greeted him. Margaret, the director. Her voice was firm, and her eyes were small, as if she hadn't trusted anyone in years. Alex introduced himself, inventing a story about wanting to support forgotten institutions. She looked at him as if seeing through him. She hesitated. But when he offered financial help, promises of improvements, connections to the Department of Family and Children's Services, and even lawyers to handle overdue paperwork, she finally agreed. Reluctantly, but she agreed. She led him to a small room with a table and 4 plastic chairs. A few minutes later, the girls entered. They sat in front of him in silence. They didn't look him directly in the eye. They weren't afraid, but neither were they curious. They were used to strangers. Alex tried to keep his composure. His voice barely came out. He asked their names, what they liked to do, if they liked to draw. Short answers, one-word responses, until he casually asked, "Who's your dad?" The silence was instant. The 3 girls looked at each other. Chloe furrowed her brow. Hannah lowered her gaze, and Ivy, the one who seemed the most determined, answered softly but firmly, "We don't have one." Alex felt a sharp blow to his chest. It wasn't anger nor surprise. It was something harder to swallow, a mixture of guilt and loss. They didn't know. They knew nothing, neither of him, nor of Emily, nor of the past that connected them. In that moment, he understood that he was inextricably involved, that he couldn't walk away now. For the first time in years, he felt the urge to cry. But he couldn't. Obsessed, Alex returned to his apartment like an automaton. As soon as he closed the door, he threw his jacket to the floor. He turned on his old MacBook, one he rarely used, and began searching through old emails, forgotten accounts, backup folders, anything that might contain something from Emily. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Then, in a secondary account he hadn't even remembered creating, he found 3 unopened emails, dated March, April, and May from 7 years ago. The subject of the first was simple: "I need to talk to you." The second said, "It's not what you think." And the third, "Please read it." He opened the first one. He read it without blinking. Emily was telling him she was pregnant, that everything that had happened wasn't what it seemed, that someone who wasn't giving names was interfering. She begged for just a few minutes. She begged him to listen. The tone wasn't melodramatic or desperate. It was real, direct, human. Alex froze. He'd never seen them. Not once. How? He checked the settings of that account. The system was set to redirect all messages to another address. Anna's. He swallowed hard. She knew. She had always known. Without thinking, he grabbed his phone and dialed Anna's number. It took her a while to answer, but when she did, her voice was as calm as ever, as if everything were fine. "Hey, little brother. Everything good?" Alex got straight to the point. "Did you swap Emily's messages?" There was a brief silence, then a dry, cynical laugh. "Alex, all I did was protect you." The phrase lit a fire inside him. "You destroyed the lives of 3 little girls," he said, his voice breaking with rage. Anna didn't hesitate. "Would you destroy our family for some woman?" Alex hung up without saying another word. He stared at his phone like it was a strange object. His chest felt heavy, and his head was spinning. For the first time, he felt disgust, not for Emily, not for the past, but for his own blood. He went back to the computer. He needed more, something that would tell him where she was, if she was still alive, if she hated him, if she knew he hadn't read those messages. He found a hidden folder among the old files. Inside, there were 3 drafts of letters, unsigned. The words were hers, Emily's, more intimate than anything else. There was an address at the end of one of them, Convento Santa Magdalena, Fort Worth, Jalisco. Alex opened Google Maps and typed in the name. The place was still there, only 30 minutes away. He felt a pressure in his chest, different from the rage. It was anxiety, it was fear, but it was also determination. The door of Convento Santa Magdalena was simple, made of dark wood, worn down by the sun. Alex pushed it open slowly, as though every inch of the entrance brought him closer to an unresolved judgment. The air inside was cooler, scented with incense and dampness. He felt out of place with his wrinkled shirt and tense expression. His heart was pounding, as though it knew what he was about to face. An older nun with a dry face and firm steps came out from a side hall. She looked him up and down with suspicion. "How may I help you?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm looking for Emily Mitchell," Alex replied. "I know she was here. I need to talk to her. It's urgent." The nun didn't respond right away. She pursed her lips as if she didn't believe a word he said. She looked at him for a few more seconds in silence, then nodded, though with evident distrust. "Wait here." Alex sat on a wooden bench by the entrance. He didn't know what to do with his hands. He didn't know how to breathe without feeling like he was about to pass out. 5 minutes passed, maybe more, and then he saw her. Emily appeared at the end of the hallway, walking slowly. She was thinner, her face pale, her hair loosely tied up, deep dark circles under eyes that no longer shone like they used to. But it was her. Unmistakable. Emily. She stopped a few meters away from him. She looked at him, and instead of speaking, she turned her face. She took half a step back, as if seeing him was painful. "Emily," he pleaded, "please, listen to me. I need to know what happened. I saw the girls." She stood with her back to him. Her body trembled slightly. And then, with a weak but firm voice, she answered, "You have no right to come here now. 7 years, Alex. 7. He took a few cautious steps closer, trying not to push the moment too much. "I didn't know. Anna diverted your messages. She hid everything from me. I was a fool, but I can't change it if you don't let me understand." Emily slowly turned around to face him. She looked at him, not with hatred, but with such a deep sadness that it hurt just to see it. Her eyes filled with tears, but none fell. "The fault was mine for believing you, for thinking a federal judge would defend me, that you would defend me. I should have left the country, but I stayed. For them." Her words cut like knives. Alex lowered his head. He didn't try to interrupt her. The birth was premature. I had no support, no money. Anna accused me of abandonment. She was the one who brought me down, and you just listened to her. No one defended me. I lost my daughters, my name, my life. Alex put his hand to his face, breathing deeply to keep from breaking down right there. Emily looked at him for a few more seconds. Then she took a step back. You can't just show up and fix everything. They don't know you, and I can barely recognize you anymore. After that day at the convent, Alex spent the following days in complete silence. He went to the courthouse as usual, but he no longer recognized himself in his reflection. He signed documents, attended hearings, walked through hallways, but everything felt like an empty routine, as though someone else were living his life from the outside. When he left the building, he no longer returned to his apartment. He wandered the city aimlessly. He no longer had the control to suppress the weight of guilt. It was then that he sought help. He got the contact information for a social worker who had been mentioned in the orphanage's documents, Sarah Evans. She was young, with a firm expression, a confident voice, and a gaze that evaluated him without blinking from the very first second. As soon as he explained that he needed to understand how to approach the girls legally, she was direct. "Are you their biological father?" she asked, arms crossed. "Or just a lawyer with remorse?" "I'm their father," Alex replied without hesitation. "And now I know the truth." She studied him for a few more seconds. Then she nodded without changing her tone. "Then let's do this the right way. But with one condition. You can't approach them as their dad. Not yet. You're going to earn their trust without titles, without imposing anything, step by step." He agreed without argument. He had no other choice. So he began visiting the orphanage every week. At first, only as a volunteer, fixing locks, painting bars, helping with accounting. He brought children's books, sweets he handed out silently, and sat with the kids to listen to their stories. He didn't push anything. He was just there. The girls noticed him from the very first week. Chloe, the quietest one, looked at him as if she were trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Hannah was sweeter, but hid behind her sister. Ivy watched everything in silence, measuring his every move. Each of them carried invisible marks that didn't need explanations. Alex didn't ask. He learned to wait. Unknowingly, they started calling him Mr. Alex. He didn't correct them. He just smiled and taught them to read, add with candy, and put together puzzles. Saturdays were different now, for both him and them. Emily saw him too. Not directly, at least not at first. Sarah acted as a bridge. Small notes, quick messages. Then, over time, brief supervised conversations. She didn't trust him, but she didn't avoid him either. Something in her gaze said there was a part of her that still wanted to believe him. For the first time in his life, Alex learned not to explain so much. He couldn't justify 7 years, so he simply listened. He sat down, lowered his gaze, and accepted whatever came his way. But the calm didn't last long. One afternoon, while he was picking up books off the floor at the orphanage, he received a call from a familiar number. It was Anna. She didn't say hello. She didn't greet him. She just launched the question with venom in her voice. "Do you think you can hide this from me?" He didn't answer. "You're talking to her, to Emily. Again. What are you doing, Alex?" That tone, that control disguised as concern, no longer earned her respect, only revulsion. He hung up without responding. But he knew in that moment she had discovered what he was doing, and she wasn't going to stay still. 2 days later, Anna Thompson summoned him to dinner at her apartment in Silver Lagoon, as if it were just a casual meeting between siblings. But Alex knew there was nothing casual about that invitation. She never improvised. The message she had sent him was clear. It's time to lay all the cards on the table. The apartment, decorated with contemporary artworks and sober colors, had a privileged view of the city. But that night, neither the luxury nor the height could disguise the tense atmosphere in the air. The table was set with care, but the food remained untouched, cold, just like Anna's smile. "You're going too far," she said, while pouring red wine into 2 glasses that clinked together, heavy with accumulated tension. "Do you really think you can rewrite history?" Alex said nothing. He sat, but didn't touch his glass. Anna looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. "You have no idea what you're messing with," she continued. "Are you willing to destroy your name for some woman? And 3 bastards." He felt his fury rise like an uncontrolled fire inside him, but he forced himself not to explode. He simply stared at her, as if trying to recognize the sister he had once trusted. Anna slid an envelope across the table. "Your social worker," she said in a calculated tone. "Sarah Evans. She has an unstable history. Are you sure you want to leave something so delicate in her hands?" Alex took the envelope, looked at it for a moment, and tore it in half without even opening it. "What you did with Emily was criminal," he said, his voice low but firm. "If I were a judge, you'd be in prison." She let out a brief, dry laugh. "But you're not. You're a judge, and you'll never have the courage to go against your own blood." "I don't know you anymore," he responded. The smile faded. Anna leaned slightly forward. "If you keep this up, I'll request provisional custody of the girls. I have the contacts, I have the arguments, and if I get it, they'll disappear again, this time for good." Alex stood up from the table without saying another word. He walked toward the door with his fists clenched, his jaw tight. This was no longer a fight for redemption. It was a war, and he knew she wouldn't use weapons. She would use influence, power, calculated lies, what she had always known how to wield. The next morning, Sarah Evans received an official notification from the Guardianship Council, a supposed summons for malpractice in the management of Casa Esperanza. The paper had a seal, a signature, and a date. It looked legitimate, but it was false. She knew it immediately. Anna was already pulling the strings. At Casa Esperanza, the girls began to show small signs of change. Alex didn't pressure them. He played, spoke little, and listened a lot. With Hannah and Ivy, the bond was starting to form naturally. They laughed at his stories, sought him out to play bingo or ask for help coloring. But Chloe was different. She was always watching, observing from a corner, as if every gesture Alex made had to pass some secret test only she knew about. That Saturday, as his visit was coming to an end, when he was already saying his goodbyes, he felt a gentle tug on his jacket sleeve. It was Chloe. She had silently followed him to the back hallway. "Did you know our mom?" she asked, her voice so low it almost sounded like a stolen whisper. Alex looked at her, not knowing how to hold himself together at that moment. "Yes," he replied. "I knew her very well." Chloe lowered her gaze. Her eyes showed no tenderness, but something much older. Distrust. "Why do you look at us like that?" she said bluntly. Alex squinted, swallowing the emotion rising in his chest. He wanted to tell her everything, but all he could manage was, "Because you're incredible, and you deserve the world." She stared at him for a moment, then she shook her head. "We only get leftovers. Everyone leaves. You will too." And with that, she turned and ran back to her bedroom without waiting for a reply. That night, Alex went to the convent without giving notice. His need to talk to Emily was consuming him. He found her in the garden, watering some wilted plants. She wasn't surprised to see him. She simply set the watering can aside and waited. "Chloe spoke to me," he said, walking slowly. "She's suspicious." Emily let out a long sigh. "She was always the hardest, the one most like you." He swallowed hard. "Do you mean Yes, she interrupted, looking directly into his eyes. They're your daughters, all three of them. Though his instinct had screamed at him from the very beginning, hearing it from her lips was like a blunt blow. It was like dynamite exploding inside him. The certainty was brutal. There was no room for doubt. I want to try, Emily. Even if it's late, even if it hurts, I want to be there. She didn't respond immediately. She walked to a flower pot, ripped off a dry leaf and threw it to the ground. Finally, she said without turning to him, then get ready to suffer, because now you're going to feel every second you denied us. The next day, Alex returned to the orphanage with a box of children's books, classic tales, stories to read aloud. He sat in the yard with the girls. Hannah immediately picked one up, excited. Ivy approached slowly. Chloe watched him from a distance. She didn't say anything. And when he tried to give her a special book, she turned away without touching it. But she didn't leave. On Monday afternoon, Sarah called Alex urgently. Emily had fainted at the convent while gathering clothes from the clothesline. She arrived unconscious at the public hospital. She was pale, with a high fever, and disoriented. The preliminary diagnosis was severe anemia and a possible infection. Alex dropped everything and rushed to the emergency room without hesitation. When he arrived, he found her lying on a stretcher, an IV in her arm, her lips cracked. She was struggling to breathe. He approached silently, afraid that his presence would only make things worse, but he didn't leave. He took her cold, weak hand while the doctors reviewed the lab results. Emily, still conscious, tried to pull her hand away. "You don't need to do this," she whispered hoarsely. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," he replied, not letting go of her hand. Emily turned her face to the wall, not looking at him. "It's easy to say that after 7 years." The comment struck him like a knife, but he didn't argue. He just stayed there, silent, while she closed her eyes and let exhaustion win the battle. When she finally fell asleep, Alex stepped out of the cubicle with his head down. He was met by a nurse in a white habit. She was the head nun of the convent, the one who had managed the house for over 20 years. "Are you family?" she asked cautiously. "Not exactly," Alex replied. "I'd like to understand how she's managed to survive all these years." The nun lowered her gaze and took a moment before answering. With dignity, she finally said. Even when she had nothing to eat, she'd rather starve than accept help from the Thompsons. She wanted to leave so many times, but she always came back for the girls. She visited them from afar, every month, without fail. Alex felt a mix of shame and admiration that he couldn't quite place. The doctor came out shortly after. They confirmed a complicated kidney infection. She needed rest, strong antibiotics, and proper nutrition. There was no insurance or recent medical history. Alex paid for everything without saying a word. Sarah found a small, discreet apartment for Emily in Tempe. No luxuries, just what she needed for recovery. Alex took care of the rent, groceries, medications, and even hired a nurse for the night shifts. But he didn't visit her. He knew that any attempt at closeness could break the fragile balance they were just beginning to build. Meanwhile, at the orphanage, Chloe found the book she had rejected weeks earlier. It was forgotten under a blanket at the foot of her bed. She picked it up without saying anything and opened it. On the first page, a dedication was written in firm handwriting, "To my stars." In the corner, 3 small hearts drawn in blue pen. Hannah came up behind her, curious. "Do you think she likes us?" Chloe took a moment to answer. She closed the book gently and hugged it to her chest. "I don't know." The next day, while Alex was working with Sarah on the next steps for Emily's legal care, a news flash hit them hard. Sarah had received an official notification from the DIF delegation. An anonymous complaint accused her of collusion with an ex-convict and questioned her professional impartiality for becoming emotionally involved with the case. She knew exactly where that was coming from, and Alex did too. Anna, the war was just beginning and she wasn't going to stop attacking. Alex understood right away. Anna wasn't going to stop. That's why, that same week, he used his access to the courthouse's internal files to obtain the old record of the supposed abandonment that had stripped Emily of her rights over her own daughters. He got it through a discreet contact in the judicial archives. The file had been closed for 6 years, signed by a retired judge. A judge who, coincidentally, had been Anna's golf partner for over 2 decades. He opened the folder and knew immediately. It was all a setup. There were no verification visits, no psychological reports, no interviews with Emily. The ruling was based on anonymous statements and a supposed emotional instability that was never professionally evaluated. The girls had been declared abandoned by omission, without anyone showing up to verify if Emily had truly left them. It all stood on assumptions and nameless words, a judicial scandal waiting to explode. Alex didn't waste time. He gathered every piece, dates, stamps, procedural inconsistencies. He identified key names, located the employees who had signed without reviewing the case, even got internal messages showing that the case had been treated as a priority by external instruction. He wasn't going to fight this war alone in the courts. So, he called Mark Scott, an investigative journalist known for uncovering judicial corruption networks in Jalisco. He handed him copies, recordings, and a summary of the case. He asked for one thing: make public what the system had silenced. When Emily found out, she was firm. "I don't want cameras or microphones. I don't want to be a pity case. I just want my daughters to be at peace." Alex nodded. "Then I'll speak. I'll show my face." Meanwhile, Anna was moving too. She knew something was brewing. She tried to get ahead of it. She privately summoned Margaret, the orphanage director, and offered her an exorbitant sum to relocate the girls to a private institution, out of Alex's, Sarah's, and Emily's reach. Margaret, a woman of principles and aged eyes, listened to her without interruption. Then she answered without hesitation. "They already have stability here, and for the first time someone truly cares about them. I won't move them, not for money." Anna leaned toward her coldly. "This is going to cost you your job." Margaret didn't respond. She simply escorted her to the door with a calm that unsettled Anna. For his part, Alex made a symbolic but crucial decision. He contacted a geneticist at the civil hospital and requested a DNA test. He knew the truth, but he needed it on paper, so no one could question it. Emily at first hesitated. The idea of signing a consent form turned her stomach. "Will this change anything?" she asked, irritated. "It will make it clear who I am," Alex replied, "even if it's just for them." She agreed, with the condition that the results would remain confidential. Only Alex and she would see them. The process was quick, 3 days, a swab, paperwork, samples. Meanwhile, Sarah was notified of her temporary suspension. The complaint was still active, and although everyone knew it was Anna's maneuver, the system had its rules. Sarah accepted without complaint, but her absence was immediately felt. The director, Margaret, was left to handle everything on her own. Alex began to feel the institutional ground crumbling beneath him. His last name, which had once opened doors, now was a double-edged sword. Some officials avoided him. Others received him with caution. No one wanted to get involved. Anna's power worked in silence, and he knew it. On Friday night, while reviewing the preliminary DNA test results that confirmed the obvious, he received a call from Mark. "We've got enough," the journalist said bluntly. "The case is strong. The file is a disgrace. There are names, omissions, political favors. We can publish it all, but I need your authorization." Alex closed his eyes. He knew what that meant, exposing his family, his name, himself. But he also knew he couldn't back down. "Do it," he said firmly. The article aired on Friday morning. At 7 o'clock sharp, the television screens, digital portals, and radios in Jalisco began to spread the headline that would land like a bombshell on the judicial system. Justice Minister's daughter involved in fraud against ex-sister-in-law. The piece was lengthy, well-documented, with dates, signatures, and compelling evidence showing how Anna Thompson had manipulated the legal system to separate Emily Mitchell from her daughters. What had once been a rumor was now national news. The reaction was immediate. Social media exploded. Hashtags with Anna's name became trending topics in less than 2 hours. Panelists on opinion programs debated live whether she should be removed from her position as an advisor in the National Justice Commission. On forums, people weren't discussing legal technicalities. They were talking about the girls, the injustice, a mother who had been silenced. The public image of the Thompsons, so carefully guarded for generations, cracked minute by minute. Alex was summoned that same day by the Ethics Council of the Federal Court. He was received by 3 judges and 2 administrative advisors. The session lasted almost 4 hours. He didn't deny anything. He presented copies of the documents, exchanged emails, the inconsistencies in the case file, and made it clear that his silence had made him complicit, but not anymore. Despite his honesty, he was temporarily suspended, not because of direct fault, but for improper exposure of the judicial system. Anna didn't take long to react. At noon, she called a press conference. Dressed in a light grey suit, sober makeup, and an expression that remained unchanged, she denied all the accusations. She claimed that Emily was emotionally unstable, with a history of erratic behavior, and accused Alex of being psychologically manipulated by his ex-partner and media interests. But the damage had already been done. That evening, as the news channels replayed the footage of her press conference, Emily made a decision. She sat in front of a camera from an independent channel, wearing a simple blouse and her hair tied up. Her hands trembled in her lap, but her voice was steady. She spoke about everything: the pregnancy alone, the trial with no defense, the clandestine visits to the orphanage, the dignity stolen from her. She didn't seek vengeance. She didn't ask for punishment. She only asked for the truth. The interview was replayed millions of times on social media. The shock was so great that donations began pouring in for Casa Esperanza from different states across the country. Volunteers offered help, lawyers made themselves available, and for the first time, Emily's story was no longer seen as a tragedy, but as a fight. Alex, exhausted and with a hoarse voice from speaking to the media and advisors, went to the orphanage the following Saturday. The girls were waiting for him in the yard. Ivy was the first to run up to him. Hannah followed. But the surprise came from Chloe. She walked toward him in silence and hugged him, tight, without saying a word. She just hugged him. Alex didn't speak. He bent down to return the gesture. Hannah clung to his back. Ivy wrapped around the other side. Director Margaret watched them from the entrance, holding back tears. Emily, still resting, watched the scene on TV. When the camera showed that embrace, she stopped talking, stopped breathing for a moment, and she cried for everything she had lost, and for everything she was beginning to get back. Sarah, finally, was exonerated. The complaint against her was dismissed as unfounded. She returned to Casa Esperanza with her head held high and was welcomed with hugs from the children and shy applause from the staff. Her place had never truly been in doubt, only her right to remain there. But while everyone celebrated small victories across the city, Anna Thompson watched the news with a glass of wine in her hand and cold eyes. No one was with her. No one was speaking to her. And yet, she didn't tremble. "If they think they've won already," she muttered quietly, "they don't know what I'm capable of." Alex knew it. That victory wasn't the end. It was just the first step. The war to rebuild a family and protect it was far from over. The following days were slower, denser. Alex didn't return to the courthouse or to his old routines. Each morning, he drank coffee in silence, went through papers, then visited Emily. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they just stayed in the same room, sharing the same air. She no longer missed him, but she didn't invite him in either. There was pain in her gaze, but also memory. Something in her seemed to be putting the past in order, like someone folding an old garment they never knew where to store. One afternoon, while he was watering some plants on the small balcony of the apartment, she spoke to him from the sofa. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she look at him. "I can't forgive you now," she said, "but I can't hate you anymore either." Alex set the watering can aside and sat down quietly. He didn't try to defend himself, nor did he search for words that might ease what she had just said. He simply nodded. He knew he couldn't rush anything. It was no longer time for explanations. It was time to stay and wait. At Casa Esperanza, the girls continued their lives with the naturalness that only children can maintain in the middle of chaos. They played, they laughed, they went to class. Alex passed by some afternoons, always with an excuse, bringing new books, delivering supplies, reading a story. He didn't invade, he was just there. Then, Chloe began leaving him notes, small folded papers that someone would hand him when he left, usually Margaret or one of the younger children. The questions were simple, but profound. "What's your favorite food? Did you like my mom before? Why do you know so much about books?" Alex answered by hand in blue ink, on sheets that smelled like coffee. He never wrote too much. He was clear, direct, sincere. He accompanied each answer with a drawing, a small origami figure, a simple toy. He gained space with patience, with respect. Ivy one day started calling him Uncle Alex. Hannah, more shy, called him Mr. A. Chloe still didn't call him anything, but every time he arrived, she looked at him from the window, and that was enough. Meanwhile, Anna's world was crumbling slowly. The media didn't let go of her. Clients at the law firm where she was a partner began to withdraw. Under pressure, she requested a leave of absence for personal reasons, though everyone knew it was to avoid her complete downfall. Her public image, once flawless, was now in ruins. It was then that a former employee of the firm, Nathan Pierce, an administrative assistant for over 8 years, contacted Alex. He wanted to meet in person. He arranged a meeting at a discreet cafe in Providencia. There, he handed him an envelope. "That signature in the abandonment file isn't Emily's," he said. "Anna forged it. I saw the document before and after it was altered. It was hard evidence, a scanned copy of the original file, internal emails, file modification logs, and a graphic comparison of signatures." Alex fell silent. It was no longer a moral accusation. It was a federal crime. Emily was summoned to testify. The notification came through the court, now under internal investigation. She trembled as she read it, not out of fear, but because of everything it implied. Still, she accepted. She dressed simply, tied her hair as usual, and entered the courthouse accompanied by Sarah and Alex. In the waiting room, the door opened. Anna entered, escorted by her lawyer. She wore dark glasses, heels, and an empty expression. Emily stood up. Her hands shook, but she didn't step back. When they stood face to face, the air seemed to stop. "You stole my voice, Anna," Emily said, staring at her sister. "But you can't steal who I am anymore." Anna didn't respond. She just stared at her, silent, as if for the first time she didn't know what to say. The next day, Alex delivered the official complaint against his sister directly to the state prosecutor's office. He brought every document, testimony, report, and signed statement. He didn't delegate anything. He wanted the delivery to be personal, every step to be recorded without filters or interpretations. His last name no longer served as a shield, and he wasn't looking for one. What had once represented power now had to stand for justice, or it was worth nothing. The prosecutor's office opened a formal investigation file. The case had a name: Anna Thompson Wallace. Soon, the media picked it up again with renewed strength. This time, not as a family scandal, but as an example of the illegal use of influence within the judicial system. The Thompson name, for years associated with figures of order and law, was now on everyone's lips as a symbol of corruption. Away from the media frenzy, Emily began healing in her own way. One ordinary day, after a walk with the girls, she returned to her old passion, painting. She rescued a canvas she had stored away in a convent closet, dusted off her brushes, bought some cheap acrylics, and started. She wasn't looking for beauty. Her paintings were intense, sometimes chaotic, other times almost explosive. She wasn't painting scenes, she was painting emotions, rage, loss, nostalgia. And amidst it all, a new form of hope she didn't even know she had. When Sarah saw Emily's work, she was moved. Within weeks, she organized a fundraising exhibition with help from contacts in the art world and activism. The event was held in a small gallery in downtown Chicago. The invitation shocked everyone. Local artists, human rights activists, progressive judges, mothers who had suffered from the system, all came. Emily's story was no longer just an anecdote, it had become a symbol. Alex arrived late, discreetly. He wore no suit, no tie, no weight from his former position. He stayed at the entrance for a moment, observing the paintings. When Emily saw him from the other end of the hall, she didn't look away. This time, there was no distance, no walls. She smiled. She walked slowly toward him. She waited for him. "You still don't deserve all this," Emily said with a tone that mixed firmness and tenderness. "But maybe you deserve a chance to earn it." Alex lowered his head, smiled faintly, and didn't say anything, because it didn't need words. That night, while the adults conversed in the gallery, Hannah leaned toward her older sister and whispered, "He's our dad, I'm sure." Chloe didn't respond immediately. She held a pamphlet from the exhibition in her hands, where there was a photo of Emily next to one of her paintings, the same look she had when she spoke with Alex. "I know too," she finally answered. On the other side of the city, Anna was summoned for questioning. The notification came by judicial order. She tried to avoid the press, asked her colleagues not to comment publicly, and stopped responding to family calls. For the first time in her life, she didn't control her environment. The names that used to protect her were now avoiding her. As for Alex, the Judicial Council offered to reinstate him in his role as judge. The decision had been favorable, and his suspension was lifted. He was called for a formal meeting, but he didn't attend. The next day, he presented a handwritten letter. "I need to dedicate myself to my real life now," he said when he handed it in. "The one I put on pause for years." He left the building walking calmly. On the street, he stopped in front of a display window and saw his reflection. For the first time, he looked at himself with different eyes. Not as a judge, not as a Thompson, not as a man who had made mistakes. He saw himself as someone who no longer feared being human. Alex rented a small house in Tempe. It was modest, with cream-colored walls, old mosaic floors, and a garden that he started to tend with his own hands. He didn't need much, just enough space to build a new routine. 3 small beds in a room decorated with drawings and warm lights, a kitchen where he tried to learn how to cook without burning the rice, and a wooden table that creaked but held strong. The house wasn't luxurious, but it breathed peace, and it was his. Emily, after several conversations with Sarah and director Margaret, allowed the first formal visits. They weren't for long. They started with a Saturday afternoon. Then, little by little, they became full weekends. The girls arrived with small backpacks, wide eyes, and cautious steps. Chloe still kept her distance. She wasn't cold, not anymore, but she didn't give herself fully either. She watched everything. She listened. She measured. She tested. Alex did what he could. He cooked spaghetti that ended up sticking together, tried to make pancakes that looked like tortillas, forgot the ingredients for rice pudding. Ivy was the first to laugh without holding back. "Dad, this is horrible!" she shouted with laughter when she tried a dish that Alex swore he knew how to make. It was the first time he heard that word from one of his daughters. "Dad!" said naturally, without fear, without doubt. He stood up from the table with a clumsy excuse, went to the bathroom, closed the door, and let the tears flow silently. He leaned against the wall. It wasn't sadness. It was a knot from everything he had been holding in for years. And though his hands trembled, he smiled. For the first time, he smiled for real. One Sunday, Chloe approached him and whispered softly, "Can I see your room?" He nodded without asking why. He led her inside. It was a simple room, with a single bed, a nightstand with law books, a desk lamp, and a shelf with picture frames. Chloe entered slowly, scanning everything. She stopped in front of a small wooden frame. It was a drawing made by her months ago, one she had left with a letter. He had framed it. "Do you keep this?" she asked. Alex took a deep breath. "It's what keeps me standing." She didn't respond. She came closer, rested her head on his shoulder, and stayed there. She didn't hug him. She didn't say anything more. She just stayed, and for him, that was enough. But the past still wasn't completely buried. Anna, unable to accept defeat, filed a petition in family court to declare Alex emotionally incapable of fatherhood. The attempt was so ridiculous, it was rejected in less than 24 hours. The judge, in his ruling, stated that the petition lacked foundation and showed clear signs of personal persecution. It didn't take much longer before the prosecutor's office formalized charges against her. The accusations were serious: ideological falsehood, witness coercion, obstruction of justice. It was a thick file supported by evidence, expert opinions, and testimonies. Anna was summoned with a mandatory presentation order. One morning, Alex showed up at the special prosecutor's office for the case. The official handed him an envelope. He opened it right there. Inside was the judicial order with his signature as the complainant and the full details of his sister's involvement. He held it for several seconds in silence. "I never thought I'd be the one to sign this," he said, almost to himself. The prosecutor looked at him with respect. Sometimes justice starts at home. Anna Thompson's arrest occurred at 6 in the morning, at her residence in the exclusive Silver Lagoon neighborhood. There was no discretion. The cameras were already outside when the officers rang the doorbell. The order was carried out without resistance, but the images spread across the country in real time. The daughter of the former Minister of Justice, influential lawyer, public figure, dragging a suitcase down the stairs with a blank expression. A symbol of the Mexican elite falling, not because of external enemies, but because of the ruins she had built herself. The news didn't just cover the event, they dissected it. Headlines with harsh phrases: a fall from privilege, corruption between siblings, the moral trial of the Thompsons. News channels debated more about Alex's silence than the arrest itself. They wanted a reaction, a comment, a stance. But he didn't speak. He didn't give interviews. He didn't publish anything. He simply came home with a bag of sweet bread, took off his shoes at the entrance, and walked straight to the girls' room. They were already awake, sitting on the shared bed, watching the news on the old TV in the room. No one said anything. Alex turned off the screen, took a deep breath, and said quietly, "It's over." For a few seconds, no one responded. Then Chloe looked him in the eye and answered, "Not yet." There was no anger in her voice, no dramatization, just a simple truth Alex already knew. Because when a lie that's lasted for years is broken down, the last thing to break is the echo it left behind. In the detention cell, Anna refused visits. She didn't want to see her father, her former colleagues, or the few friends she had left. The grey walls didn't scare her. What wore her down was the silence, the real one, the one that comes when there's no one left to manipulate or blame. For the first time in her life, she had no one to justify her actions. She was alone. In the exact center of the labyrinth she had built herself. Emily received the news in the convent's kitchen while helping the sisters prepare the food packages. She didn't cry. She didn't celebrate. She simply lowered her head, took a slow breath, and kept cutting vegetables. "She's going to pay," Emily said with a calm that came from exhaustion, not peace. "But what I lost, it won't come back." Alex went to see her that same afternoon. He didn't bring the girls. They wanted to talk without filters, without guarding their gestures. They walked through the convent's garden, between dry soil and flowers planted by the residents. They didn't speak much. They stopped in front of the wall where Emily had hung one of her most recent paintings, a mix of dirty white with a red that seemed to explode from the center. "Maybe it won't come back," he responded softly. "But we can build something new." Emily didn't answer. She just looked at him from the side. There were no promises, no romanticism. It wasn't an ideal start. It was real. Alex didn't know where to begin, but he knew he would try every day, even if he failed, even if it hurt, and that, for the first time, seemed enough. The girls started staying with him on weekends. It was a simple agreement with Emily, a sign of trust without great declarations. They arrived with colorful pajamas, stuffed animals, blankets they insisted on bringing from Casa Esperanza. Saturday afternoons filled with noise, made-up songs, fights over who would choose the movie. Alex didn't sleep much, but he didn't need to. The house finally had a voice. Chloe took the big room, but insisted on leaving the door slightly open. Ivy settled on an inflatable mattress beside Alex's bed, and Hannah, always affectionate, ended up falling asleep on the couch while he told improvised stories that didn't always make sense. The laughter returned. Not like before, because there had never been a real before, but like something new, something that, despite the scars, was born for real. One morning, Alex woke up earlier than the others and went to the backyard with a cup of coffee. On the fence, hung with 2 clothespins, was a new painting by Emily. She had left it there the night before, without saying a word. It was large, intense, almost raw, a woman standing with her back to the viewer, surrounded by 3 girls who were looking up at her. Beside her, a faceless man, not without identity, but without a past. The painting was titled Beginning. It was signed with firm handwriting without hesitation. Alex stared at it for several minutes. He didn't know what to feel first. Gratitude, melancholy, fear, or a mixture of all of that. But what he did know, as he looked at the strokes and colors, was that Emily wasn't just painting what she felt. She was painting what she had already accepted, even though she hadn't said it with words yet. Days later, in a symbolic hearing arranged with Sarah's help, a legally unnecessary but emotionally invaluable act was formalized. Alex officially recognized his paternity of the 3 girls in the same courtroom where he had once signed his divorce papers. This time, the room was filled with flowers, drawings hanging on the walls, and a judge who didn't hide her smile. The girls signed with crayons. Chloe used a strong blue. Ivy chose pink. Hannah picked yellow. Each wrote her name in uneven letters, some even backward. Alex signed last, his usual signature but trembling. Not from fear, from emotion, from memory. When they left the courtroom, Emily was waiting for him on the steps. There were no cameras, no press, no speeches, just her, standing with her hair loose and clear eyes. He stopped in front of her. He had learned to wait, not to force words. But this time, she spoke first. "Now, yes," she said softly. "Would you ask me for a second chance?" He smiled, not with arrogance, not with haste. He smiled like someone who had crossed a desert and found water, not by chance, but because he had learned to endure. "Emily Mitchell, would you give me the honor of starting by your side?" She looked at him for one more moment, as if trying to store that moment in her memory. Then she nodded calmly. "You've already started." A year later, Alex Thompson no longer wore a tie. His days began with coffee brewed in a clay pot, lunchboxes half-packed, and the sound of children's voices shouting from different rooms. They lived in a house in the San Andres neighborhood, in Tempe. It wasn't luxurious, but it had a garden full of plants that Emily tended with devotion. The walls were decorated with drawings, phrases from the girls written in markers on sheets of paper taped to the walls, and some small paintings signed by Emily, which were occasionally sold at cultural markets. Alex taught at the law school at the University of Chicago. He liked the environment. It was different from the courthouse. More noise, more debate, more contradiction, but also more hope. He spoke about judicial ethics, abuse of power, family rights. He never told his story, but his students knew he spoke with weight, with truth. Emily sold her paintings, yes, but she also held art workshops in community spaces. She hadn't exhibited formally again. She didn't need to. The girls were doing well in school. Chloe excelled in science, Hannah in reading, Ivy in drawing. The afternoons were filled with homework, scoldings, laughter, and snacks with sweet bread. Peace didn't come from forgetting. It came from the present. Meanwhile, Anna Thompson was sentenced to 5 years in prison in an open-regime detention center. The sentence was issued without spectacle. No media was allowed inside. Only a few family members, lawyers, and she, dressed in beige, with her face free of makeup, her lips pressed together with the force of someone who prefers pride over redemption. She refused to confess. She didn't ask for forgiveness. When the judge offered her a final word, she chose silence. It was the last time her name was heard in a courtroom. Alex visited her only once. He requested to see her in the common area of the detention center. He didn't bring reproaches nor papers. He simply sat across from her, an envelope in his hand. Inside was a copy of Emily's letter, the one Anna had intercepted 7 years ago, and a handwritten note from him. "You can still do the right thing," he said, and left the envelope on the table. Anna didn't open it. She didn't respond. She simply looked at him once, with the same eyes she had always used to impose respect. But now, those eyes were empty. Alex didn't return. At home, the girls adapted to their way of saying things. Chloe, one day, in the middle of an argument over who would do the dishes, called him Dad with natural ease. No rehearsals, no hesitation. Hannah had dubbed him Dad Lay, because she couldn't pronounce Alex correctly when she was younger. And Ivy just smiled. But when she hugged him, she did so as if she knew everything. One ordinary afternoon, the 5 of them went for a walk in downtown Chicago. Emily wore a light blue dress. He carried a backpack with water and toys, and the girls ran ahead, unafraid. They stopped at Tapatía Square, where it had all started. Alex stood staring at a bench, the same one he had once sat at, not understanding what he was seeing. "That's the day my life fell apart," he said, more to himself than to her. Emily looked at him, her eyes calm, and the day it started again. Sometime later, Alex wrote an article that was published in several newspapers across the country. It was titled, "When Justice Fails at Home." It wasn't a piece of revenge. It was an essay about responsibility, about the gaps in the system, about how power can distort love when it becomes a wall between truth and pain. The final sentence read, "It's not enough to be the judge of the world. We must learn to be just with those we love." One Saturday afternoon, while the sun began to change the color of the sky, Chloe ran through the garden, excited, with a smile that was impossible to ignore. She shouted from the other side of the house, "Dad, come! Let's watch the sky change color together." And he went.